Hey everyone, and welcome to our newest Bikes and Gear video on the road bicycle maintenance. In this video we are going to run you through how we do maintenance on our bicycles on our journey around the world. Now, on the road bicycle maintenance is of course a little bit different to maintenance at home, a bigger service you may do at home, because of your limited amount of tools that you will be carrying with you and the limited amount of facilities you have to do the maintenance. Nevertheless, we are going to show you what has worked for us the past 1.5 years. Alright, let's have a look. So bicycle maintenance on the road is actually a little bit of a subjective matter, not only because everybody has slightly different routines and tricks they use to do maintenance on the road, but also because every bike is a little bit different, even though of course bicycles are essentially the same. But if you have suspension forks, if you have hydraulic brakes versus cable operated brakes and so on, yeah, your maintenance routine will be a little bit different. To do the maintenance on the road, we use our tool set, where we will actually soon do a separate video on to run you through what we have in this tool set. We use a multi-tool for actually pretty much 90% of the basic maintenance we do on the road. And then to clean, which we'll talk about in a second, we often, when we're in the middle of nowhere, like right now, use wet wipes. We try to use these as conservatively as possible, of course, because they aren't great for the environment, but they are a good solution, unfortunately. Or if you are in a hostel or have access to a cloth and some soap and water, not unlimited water, then of course we try to use that. So yeah, like I mentioned, cleaning is a big part, and actually the first big part of any good maintenance. So that's what we are going to start with. We are going to clean our bikes. So how often you do maintenance on your bikes is, like I already mentioned, a little bit subjective. It depends, for example, on the conditions you're riding in, and some things on your bikes may have to be maintained more often than other things. For us, we have actually scheduled on our phones a bike check routine every 2 weeks, as over the months now and years it's kind of been clear that every 2 weeks is a good routine for us. The cleaning we do, for example, which we're going to start off with now, isn't always in the same intensity. Sometimes we actually have to find a place where we can use a hose to hose off our bikes because they're so dirty. Sometimes, yeah, we can get away with just using half a wet wipe or a wet wipe to clean the whole bike. But in this bike check routine, we literally set us, we have in the description field all the things we do so we don't forget anything, even though after a while you of course get into the routine of it. And this is actually the biggest tip we can give you for on-the-road maintenance, is set yourself a routine. You will forget it. We've forgotten it in the past until we had this routine, this reminder on our phone, because when you're just riding every day, all days start to blend together at some point, and yeah, you don't remember the last time you did a proper maintenance, a proper check. So set yourself a routine. So as you can see, at some point I flipped the bike after I cleaned everything that I need to clean from the top. So I was able to clean also parts that you can't really reach. And by flipping the bike, which which definitely also helps for the rest of the maintenance we're going to do, you kind of replace a bike stand, which of course you wouldn't normally have access to when on the road. Now when you're done cleaning, this definitely wasn't a deep clean. We only cleaned parts that are, for example, a bit prone to rusting, like the frame, the fork especially, and just things that get really greasy around the chain, for example. And you've pretty much used your wet wipe now. You can kind of use this at the end to clean the whole drivetrain, which is also the part where we will start with the proper maintenance afterwards. So if you have access to a proper degreaser, it's definitely worth using that every once in a while to clean the drivetrain. As you can see, we did it as best as we could now with a wet wipe, and most of the time that's pretty fine, especially if the chain isn't in too bad a state, if you haven't been riding in really muddy and wet conditions. And now we're actually going to start with the proper maintenance. This is also the first part of our bike check routine, which is the drivetrain. And once we've cleaned the chain and the pulleys and so on, we are going to, or degreased it, we are going to re-grease it. We actually carry two different types of lubricant, wet lube for wet conditions, and what we use most of the time actually though, like a kind of dry lube. This is a 3-in-1 lubricant or chain oil, which not only lubricates but also cleans it a bit and kind of dissolves off the residue that may still be on the chain and on the pulleys. And yeah, this is because we're currently in the desert, there's no rain in sight. This is what we're going to use now to re-lube the chain. So important when using any kind of liquid lube, make sure to shake it before you use it and to apply it to the inside of the chain. And when you do so, only apply a tiny bit. You really don't need too much. So if there's a little bit too much lube on your chain and it's looking very wet, then you can use your dry wet wipe from before or any kind of rag to just kind of dry it out and wipe it down a bit, because you really don't want too much lube on the chain. It will just attract more dirt. For us, a 2-in-1 or 3-in-1 kind of chain oil, very basic one from a hardware store, has actually worked the best in the past because it attracts very little dirt and we actually really don't have to clean the chain by hand a lot if we use that kind of lubricant. Of course, in wet conditions we do use the wet lube, but yeah. In the past we have also been told that wax-based lubes are really good. The problem is we don't really see this as a good solution for being on the road, because first of all your chain has to be pretty much spotless before you apply wax lube, and then apparently the best solution is to actually soak the chain in liquid wax, which is just way too much work for on the road. But when we are back at some point, we will definitely try this out because we've heard really good things about it. Alright, so let's continue with doing maintenance on the drivetrain. Like I said, this is the first big part of our, besides from cleaning the bike after on our bike check routine. Kind of working from the front to the back. Well, actually before we work from the front to the back, if you have your bike flipped around like this, you can just kind of shift through all the gears, make sure everything works. This is, yeah, I'm not going to do the back now because we already did it and we know everything works. But this is, yeah, just an easy way to make sure all your gears are indexed correctly. Then at the front, check your pedals, that the bearings feel good and they spin freely. Check the bottom bracket. Of course, when the chain is off, if you're changing your chain anyway, it's always good to get a sense of the bearings in the bottom bracket without the chain, so you don't have the resistance of the chain. But nevertheless, you will feel if there's something majorly wrong with the bearings in your bottom bracket. Also, a really good indicator we found in the bottom bracket bearings is seeing if they have any play, so kind of just holding the frame and moving the crank around. And we've actually kind of noticed now after 5, this is a pretty basic square tapered bottom bracket which we both have, and we've had more high quality ones from Shimano, but also no-name brands over the 1.5 years now, just pretty much what has been available to us. And after 5,000 kilometers you should really start checking the bottom bracket regularly, because we have had ones fail after 5,000 to 6,000 kilometers. But yeah, this still feels really good because it's also pretty new. Then check the wear on your crank chain rings at the front. My front lowest chain ring is very worn out, so I'm going to actually change my crank pretty soon. But yeah, you should definitely have a look at that. You can of course clean it even more if you see it's still really dirty, but yeah, we're not going to do that right now. Then getting to the actual chain, we have a chain tool to measure the chain wear, the stretch of our chain. If a chain stretches too much, not only does the motion become less efficient, but also it'll wear out your cassette and your chain rings on the crank much faster, so it is good to change it regularly. And what actually annoys us the most is that the shifting just becomes less precise when the chain is too stretched, and the shifting takes longer and so on. That's why we do change our chains pretty regularly. We could of course use them longer, but like I mentioned, it's wears everything else out faster and is annoying when shifting. So yeah. So you can either do that by measuring it, or if you just spin the crank, if the chain is very stretched, this process will, and the chain is too dirty and etc. of course as well, but this will become much, you will have much more resistance here, and that's also a good indication of how worn the chain is. Then getting to the rear derailleur, of course, you should see that everything is indexed correctly and the end stops are adjusted correctly, and then you can shift up and down fluently. Also make sure to check the wear on your pulleys. We recently actually had our bottom pulley, worn out like crazy, and because I had such an old derailleur model before, now I have bought a newer one recently, I couldn't get a spare part of the pulley wheel anymore. Now we have a new derailleur, but we even changed the lower pulley, which wears out faster than the top one, to a metal pulley, so made out of aluminum. So we'll see if this lasts a bit longer now and doesn't get too pointy too quickly. And finally also check the wear on the cassette, and yeah, change this if necessary. Alright, let's continue by looking at the wheels. This is the third, so to say, big section of our maintenance routine. So on the wheels there are several things you have to do. It's pretty much identical for the front and back wheel. First of all, which we kind of do every 2 weeks, is just have a look at the tires, not only to check the wear, but also to see if there's any major cuts or something we should be concerned about, any debris in the tires, which we have to see, but that looks good. Then of course check the pressure and pump up the tires if necessary. We did this recently, so we're not going to do it again now. Then, very important, is check the spoke tension. I always start at the valves, so I know when I've done a full rotation, and then this is a matter of feeling. I have to go through and just make sure they feel relatively evenly tensioned. Of course we don't have a tension tool, but yeah. And if one does seem very loose, then tighten it up with a spoke tool, or a spoke tool, either a designated one or one on your multi-tool, and yeah, make sure until they all feel about even. Then check how the wheel is running, the trueness of the wheel. That looks pretty good. What you can also do either is looking at the tire itself isn't always a good indication, because sometimes if the tire is a little bit uneven, that may run a bit wonky, but the rim itself actually looks good. If you have V-brakes like we do, you can just look at the play at the brake pad, or you can put a little cable tie here, which you can use as an indication as well of how well your rim is running, but this looks really good. Then you can also check the play of the bearings on your rear hub. This does have a little bit of play because I recently got a rear hub that is unfortunately not so good quality, but it's the only thing that was available, so maybe at some point I'll have to get this serviced, the bearings replaced, or if it's cheaper to get a new hub, then get a new hub. But yeah, you can kind of hear that has a little bit of play. And then also when you're checking the rim, that there's no cracks or anything in the rim, and that if you don't have disc brakes, if you have disc brakes, check the disc. If you have rim brakes, check the braking pad or the braking side of the rim for any cracks or so on. And if you feel over here, you can also feel if it's too concave, then it's definitely time to change the rims. We actually got our rims replaced pretty recently because Luisa's front rim cracked. If you've seen our Peru documentary, you will know about that. And that they lasted around 20,000 kilometers now, so this set we will probably get replaced a bit sooner. After 15,000, 18,000 we'll have to have a look. Alright, and then pretty much do the same thing for your front wheel. I have my brake on here. Yeah, just quickly go through. And so on. I'm not going to do it all again now. Check the tire, check the rims if they feel alright. Check for play. And that's pretty much it with the wheels. So the last point on our bike check routine is the best of the rest, so to say, where we check all the small things that are not part of the drivetrain or wheels. This will include the brakes, checking if they move and open fluently. This of course depends on the type of brakes you have. If you have disc brakes, rim brakes, hydraulic brakes, non-hydraulic brake, mechanical brakes. For us, yeah, the calipers like to get stuck sometimes, so we sometimes actually also use our 3-in-1 lube to kind of put them a bit on the bearings here to loosen them up again, and just actuate them a few times to loosen them up. Then checking that the brake pads line up properly to the rim, because they can kind of carve away unevenly over time, so we have to readjust them at some point. Also readjust the cable, so the actuation is always the same. Then also checking all the bolts, especially if you've been riding off-road on rattly roads for a long time, checking all the bolts of the racks and so on. Yeah, just going through. This we don't always do every 2 weeks, even though it's part of our check routine, because most of the time if we're on asphalt we don't need to. Then we'll show you this at the end, because we'll have to flip the bike around again for that, is checking the headstock, that is tight. Also there are different types of headstocks. I have a very weird old design where it's literally 2 locking nuts which hold the headstock, and this is just pushed in, so that does loosen a bit over time, and it doesn't have a star nut like modern systems, so this is something I have to check frequently as well. And just doing a last kind of inspection, visual inspection of the bike, making sure everything sits tight, the racks aren't too rusted and could break. We actually had this recently with Louisa's rear rack, and that's why we had it replaced. And specific also for my bike, because I have a leather saddle, you can't really see it right now, but I have to wax the leather saddle pretty frequently as well, which is annoying, which is also the reason I'm getting a new saddle soon, a synthetic gel saddle. But yeah, this is the best of the rest is very bike specific, and you just got to really make sure that you're happy with your bike in the state that it's in, and that you're ready to cycle on for another few weeks until the next routine. So that was our on-the-road maintenance routine for our bikes. But before we end this video, we want to give you a few little on-the-road maintenance hacks, so to say, that may help you out in tricky situations. Some of these things we have already personally tried, some we've only heard and seen, but heard that they work. So first of all, when riding for a long time, using the same set of tires for a long time, maybe also because you don't have anything good available, any other tires available at the moment, a really good hack is to swap the front and rear tire at about half-life of your tire. For these ones it's around 4,000 kilometers, and this actually prolongs the life or the usage you can get out of your tires, because in most circumstances the rear tire wears out much faster than the front tire because of the heavier weight and the force of the pedal stroke. So by swapping front and back, at some point you will extend the life of your tires. Now, staying with the tires and continuing at the front, if you have a puncture in your tube, if you're not running tubeless, and you don't have any more patch kits, no spare tubes, and you're really in a tricky situation, we have heard, we have never actually tried this though, that you can put a knot in the tube where the hole is. You have to position it well so the knot is exactly on the hole, and inflate it in your tire, and this will actually save you if you're in the middle of nowhere. Also, if you have a major cut, for example, or opening in your tire, then you can line that from the inside with something like packaging material, or even we've heard of a dollar bill, something like that, and then inflate a tube inside, and that will prevent the tube from spilling out there and popping, we actually had this situation that the tires sliced open with a previous set of Louisa's tires, and we lined it with some duct tape, which actually worked really well for a short period of time until we can get a new tire. Also, duct tape is very handy to replace rim tape on the inside of the rim. Yeah, because if your rim tape is worn out, for example, and has a sharp edge, then that can actually slice open your tube. So if you line that with duct tape, then that's also really handy. So continuing with the drivetrain, we have a few little hacks for you as well. Starting at the front of the drivetrain with the pedals. We actually had this once in the US that we had fairly cheap pedals, and the bearings, yeah, just completely disintegrated on the pedals. So you can actually take the actual pedal off by unscrewing this screw here, this nut here, take it off, and then you just have the pedal axle on which this pedal sits with bearings in between. And you can for a short time actually pedal on just the axle, yeah, which will definitely get you to the next town in the worst case. Also, if your chain rips, for example, it's really good to carry just chain master links, so you can just, it does make the chain a bit shorter, but you would still in most cases be able to shift most gears. But yeah, you can just rejoin the chain again and continue riding. Worst case, if your derailleur fails catastrophically and really snaps off, or the eyelet for the derailleur snaps off, and you can't mount the derailleur or use the derailleur anymore, you can actually still ride single speed by just shortening the chain really crazy. Well, first you have to decide which gear you want to be in, if you're mostly going downhill or flat or so on. And then, yeah, just shorten the chain to a point where it's just a single speed, but this will still most likely get you to the next town, just in case. And generally, of course, just be creative with your hacks, because of course bicycles are not super complex machines, and for most technical problems or mechanical problems you may have on your bikes, there might actually be a solution, at least one, that will get you to the next town. Alright, thank you for watching. That's already it. We hope you enjoyed this video. We hope you learned something from this video. Please remember, like I mentioned at the beginning, that yeah, bicycle maintenance, especially on the road, maintenance is a little bit subjective. So this is what has worked for us. It may not be the perfect solution for when you're in a workshop, but for us, yeah, like I said, it's worked really well. If you have any hacks, any tips, or any your own kind of tricks that you use for bicycle maintenance on the road, we'd love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below, and remember to like and subscribe, and yeah, help our channel if you feel that you learned something.